A majority of people want to make art that's beautiful, and specifically compositions that are beautiful. But what if we could get there by looking at the shadow side of that? Making compositions that are ugly, insipid, boring, and any of those things that most artists are allergic to. Hi, my name is Marie-Noëlle Worm. I'm an artist, illustrator, also a top teacher on Skillshare. I also do YouTube videos here, as well as like my own little Patreon community where we have live drawing sessions every month. And today I want us to get into the subject of composition. This is actually attached to a class that I made on Skillshare called Art Composition Fundamentals, exploring value, contrast, shape, and balance in Procreate or pen and ink. You don't need to have taken this class of mine to participate in this bonus exercise that we're going to be doing today. But if you did want to deepen your knowledge of composition and understand what it is that kind of underpins beautiful, powerful artworks and how you can practice the characteristics that are used by the masters and by very skilled artists and illustrators in order to create the kind of art that you want to create, then I hope that you'll join in that class. It's very hands-on. We get into the nitty-gritty tips and techniques on what you can do specifically to get better at composition. And I'm super happy to be partnering with Skillshare today in order to share about that class, but also give you this bonus exercise. The first 500 people to use my link in the description or scan the QR code will be able to get 20% off a 1-year membership to Skillshare. You'll also get access to a 7-day free trial and of course a 30-day money-back guarantee if it doesn't work for you. If you don't know Skillshare, it's a platform with thousands of classes. Obviously, I talk about drawing and illustration, but there's actually a range of different classes that you can choose from, including photography, animation, graphic design, music, and arts and crafts in general. Skillshare also has this principle of being very project-based, this invitation to really participate and put some marks down in your sketchbook and share those projects with not only the teachers, but your fellow creatives. So with that being said, let's dive right in. I want you to grab a sketchbook, some sort of pen and ink. It could be a brush pen, a marker, or you could even use Procreate. That's an awesome tool as well. And let's dive into making the worst compositions that you've ever made before. So hopefully you've grabbed your sketchbook. As you can see, mine is a very simple sketchbook with thin pages. If you're curious, it's actually the Leuchtturm 1917, which is kind of the equivalent of a Moleskine. I don't mind that it has thin pages because we're going to be making ugly things today. Before we launch off into some of the ideas behind what I want us to practice today, we're just going to have a go at it and just start making one composition. So I'm gonna actually just create a frame here, and I invite you to do the same. You might even just do it on printer paper and that would be fine as well. And I'm just going to try to make an ugly composition, just with that kind of idea prompt in mind. Okay, what if I have a thing here and then another thing here? I don't really know what I'm doing, and that's the point. Okay, what if I do some weird things over here? And I'm going to say actually for all of these compositions that we're going to do, they're going to be very abstract because I just thought that would be easier to explore with. And maybe, I'm using a brush pen here, but I'm actually going to fill in the white spots just so that we're working with kind of solid shapes and that there's not too much emphasis on the texture, because I really want it to be about the shapes that we're doing. So you see I'm kind of trying to smooth those edges, and you see I did something pretty fast initially, but now I'm kind of taking my time to make those shapes a little bit smoother, bring some consistency into that. I'm curious what you think about the first ugly composition that you made. Do you find it ugly? Do you find mine ugly? I'm almost done here, so we're gonna be able to really observe it a little bit more closely. Mine is pretty ugly, but if I had to rate it on a scale of ugliness, let's say where 10 is the most ugly and 1 is the most beautiful, you know, because we're flipping things on their head, I can see it's kind of average. It's definitely more on the ugly side, so maybe I'll give this a 6 out of 10 ugliness. Let's try another one. I want to make an ugly composition, something that's uglier than this. So what if I just made a square shape with like a little white bit sticking out over there, and then, I don't know, a line, then maybe another shape that's the same as that initial one. See, this already looks a little bit interesting because, you know, it's kind of off kilter. So what if I put another one? It's the same size more or less. And then I continue that line over there. And then I make another line over here. And honestly, I'm going in totally blind here. I didn't prepare ugly compositions before I started this video. I kind of wanted to play it along with you just to see how it would feel and what is it that it actually means to make an ugly composition. I'm not entirely sure, but this is what we're exploring, right? The thing that I'm realizing now with mine is I was trying to make it a little bit boring by having some of these repeated shapes. And yeah, I would say it's maybe a little bit more boring than this one, but funnily enough, it kind of looks like, you know, those art movements with the, now I'm forgetting what it is. Is it Malevich? No. There are these art pieces where they have like tons of like squares and lines, and I'm embarrassed to say that it's complete. My mind has gone blank and I'm not remembering which one it is. So it's funny because it's not that ugly. Maybe I would say, is it uglier? Maybe it's a 7 out of 10 ugliness, but rather than ugliness, I would maybe call it boring. What if I took that same one and now I try to make that one even more boring? Okay, so we're going to use something very similar here. I'm going to maybe keep that line, but I'm going to bring it all the way to the end. I'm going to bring that second line, and then I'm going to bring this line down. And so maybe I'll just make like kind of like a perfect grid, because that feels like it would be maybe a little bit more boring. And then what if I just colored in this shape, and this shape? So if I look at these two, I think this one is definitely more boring than this one, right? Wouldn't you say? Maybe 8 out of 10 boring. You know what? I'm going to change this one to a 6 out of 10 boring and this one to a 7 out of 10 boring. Okay, what if I try to push this one even more into the boring realm? And I want you with your own works to really just approach this with a sense of curiosity. There might be a lot of confusion. I know I'm experiencing confusion as to, okay, what is it that I'm looking for? But be curious about that confusion. Isn't that interesting that we're struggling to see what it is that visually might be more boring? So if I think of this thing, one of the things I notice is I kind of cut the canvas kind of in 3. What if instead I cut it in 2, like that? Or in 4, actually, maybe in 4. So we're even more kind of at equal things. So I'm going to cut this one also first in half and then in half again. And obviously I'm not perfect here. And then I'm going to color one of these in. But then, see, this annoys me because I'm like, oh no, these aren't boring enough, because you see how it's kind of off-center? So maybe this is a little bit too interesting compared to this one, which had the equalness. So what if I color that one in and then that makes it a little bit more equal? Yeah, I have to say that I find this pretty boring, honestly. Maybe my most boring one. 8 out of 10 boring. Okay, but let's maybe go back to something that has a little bit more organic shapes. How are you getting on with your boring or ugly drawings? Are you struggling? I know I am. I'm just gonna, okay, maybe this is ugly. If I make some sort of just a weird shape over here, like something that's kind of blobby, like a blobby shape. But I'm gonna make another blobby shape, and then I'm gonna pull another line that's kind of symmetrical to the other one. It's kind of ugly. And what if I try to make, I don't know, like I could add like little details? Does that make that more ugly or less ugly? Maybe I can do a lot of like, ooh, I know. Okay, I'm just going to do a lot of these kind of little lines, but that are kind of chaotic and don't really have a point except to be kind of annoying in terms of my composition. Like, because those shapes, they just felt like, oh, okay, well, look, I'm making these really clear shapes and I'm making like a bold kind of statement. And so what if I just add a lot of busyness, a lot of different marks everywhere? Let's see what that does. Okay. Yeah, I think that makes it uglier. What do you think? If you look at mine right now, I would say this one is maybe my ugliest one yet. Okay, I'm gonna give that one a 9 out of 10 ugliness. I've got a winner in there. Let's do one more. I'm finding this very interesting to try to find an ugly composition. It's really harder than you'd think, wouldn't you say? All right, so there's something I learned there. What if instead of doing big shapes, I just did tons of little shapes? Okay, at what point is this starting to get ugly? I think this is not bad, but you know, it still looks too interesting to me because my eye now seems to be following this white space, and it's like going on this kind of interesting journey in the white space. So I'm not finding this ugly enough. So maybe I need to cut off the journey of the white space. Let's see what happens if I kind of close off the path that the white space shows me. Okay, but see, this is still too interesting over here. Something like that. Okay, this looks pretty ugly because I feel like my eye doesn't really know where to go, and it's kind of like lost on the edges. I don't know if you get that same feeling by looking at mine, but I think this one is not too bad. It might be another contender for a 9 out of 10 ugliness. Maybe I'll add a little bit more details in there. So let's just take a little break here and assess. First of all, I want you to observe how much more difficult it is than we think to make an ugly composition. Why is that? It's really interesting because, of course, there are some artworks that are more powerful to look at, and there are some artworks that are less powerful to look at. But to me, it really shows that actually it has more to do with what the visual language of the composition shows. So, for example, if we look at my boring ones where I was trying to go ugly by being boring, okay? So just doing these sort of simple geometric shapes. But if you look at some of these, like this one, or even this one has an interesting kind of like, you're like, oh, well, why is this a little thinner than this? There's something in there that kind of makes you wonder about what these shapes are. In these two, you have a little bit less of that, right? They're very symmetrical, kind of homogeneous. They're almost like a repeated pattern. Do you find patterns boring? I mean, technically, I guess you could say that you might not want to look at a pattern for, hours. But then again, there are some patterns that are absolutely beautiful. It's more that the patterns here, the boringness, is just a way of emphasizing kind of the repetitive similarity of things. Yeah, it's boring, but it's also not. So I hope you're getting a sense of what I'm talking about here, that composition is really more about the meaning or the thing that you want to convey. So if I wanted to convey something that shows repetition, structure, symmetry, then of course I would go for a composition that emphasizes that. And if I'm looking for a composition that is like varied and dynamic and full of movement, then of course, in contrast to these look boring. It's really more about what it is that you want to do. That being said, if we take that off the table completely, so we don't want to just think that all compositions are created equal, because I don't think that that's the case. But I just want you to kind of see that there's a little bit more complexity there than just beauty and ugliness. Let's look at these other ones, these 3 that I made that were ugly. I thought I started off pretty well in terms of ugliness on this one, but then if I compare it to these, this actually looks much more interesting to me. I start wondering like, oh, what is this a structure of? How could this, like, what abstract shapes are happening in here? And you know what? My eye has a path to follow around here. And it kind of stops at different locations within my composition. And so that's why I think this one is less ugly than this one, where my eye doesn't quite know where to go. So if I had to think about it, this one has kind of a lack of focal point. You know, like it could look over here, it could look over here, it could look, it's like there's no hierarchy that really stands out. In comparison, this one has a little bit more of those focal points, right? You have this shape, you have this weird structure, you have this one. How about this one? This one also, you don't have so much of a focal point either. And my eye also gets confused, like, what is this about? So there's some sense, I think, of confusion about what this painting is about. And in comparison, this one has less confusion about what it's about. So do you see how in doing these sort of ugly compositions, we can really get a sense of what might help clarify and strengthen the compositions that we make. Okay, I'm going to ask you to just join me for just a couple more, just because it's fun and random and a little weird. And this time we're actually going to, I think it would be fun to introduce maybe a figurative element. I guess my paper's pretty see-through, so I'm just going to go over here. And what we're going to bring in is a tree. How can you make a composition that includes a tree that is ugly? That's our prompt for now. So I'm gonna try, I don't know, I'm thinking about kind of like the rule of thirds and like going against the rule of thirds. So I'm just gonna put my subject right in the middle. And I'm also gonna make the shapes of my tree maybe less interesting. Maybe the trunk is kind of mid. It's not thin, it's not thick, it's just really kind of in the middle. And then this is my tree, also kind of mid. Just trying to make the tree not very interesting. So that's the beginning of my composition, but how am I gonna make this ugly? Maybe I can use things that I learned in these ones to try to make it ugly. So for example, in this one, we found that, you know, having a lack of focal points, so you don't really know where your eye is gonna go, would make it a little bit uglier. So let me try to do that. If there's a lack of focal point, then it might mean that I might need to add like tons of, I don't know, strokes. So I'm gonna make kind of grassy strokes over here. But maybe I'm not going to go all the way to the edge. I'm just going to, you know, I'm going to make it seem like I wasn't paying enough attention. And yes, I could have gone to the edge, but I'm not going to the edge enough. And I'm just leaving a little bit of space there. What if I then, how else can I make this ugly? What if I have another kind of tree, like a trunk over here, like that? Maybe I'll do a symmetry to make it a little boring. And then maybe I'm gonna actually have trees behind here that are obviously a little smaller because they're further away, but it's gonna like just touch the edge of the canvas, like just the edge, creating a tangent. One more over here. So like maybe you don't even realize that there's a tree anymore because I've put other trees in there. Put another one. So there's no real space, but I'm leaving the tiniest amount of tangential space over there. Okay, I think I'm getting to something pretty ugly here. And maybe I'll make it touch the edge and then touch the edge over here. Okay, and then I'll have another one maybe over here. Oof, yeah. Okay, I think I did pretty good on my ugly composition. I want you now, instead of like giving it a rating, I just want you to kind of describe what it is that you see with yours. Mine looks a little busy, a little confused. I'm not sure what to look at, and I'm a little confused by the white edge at the bottom, and also these like weird little tiny white spaces and the tangents are distracting me. Should we do one more ugly one? Let's do another ugly tree, but I'm not going to put it in the center this time. And maybe I'll try to do an ugly tree, kind of a different shape. So like maybe like a mushroom-like shape. What if I added like a house in there? So I have a house, some sort of ugly little house with a window. what else? I guess there's another tree over here, and I'm gonna make these weird tangents again with like tiny little white spaces. It's pretty ugly. What if I make ground like this? Then what if I have like, oh, I want to have tons of like birds. And so I'll have like little birds. But I put so many of them, like maybe they just kind of go in a line. I'm still annoyed because this looks too intentional still. What if I have some birds on the roof? What if I had like a tree that had like branches? So it'll kind of like comes in front of the house and it kind of goes in front of the birds as well. And then maybe I have another tree over here with branches, and maybe I have some bushes over here. This isn't too bad. It's looking pretty messy. But then look, do you see how it's funny? Because I added so many of these trees that now it seems like there's a new focal point, which is these 4 little birds over there. So now it feels a little too intentional again. So what if I guess, put in more birds so that it's a bit more confusing? So in this one, how I would describe it, too many competing elements. What am I looking at? So in both of these, I'm getting a sense of, okay, so the ugliness comes from not being sure what I'm looking at, right? Am I looking at the house? Am I looking at the birds? Am I looking at the trees? Weird white line at the bottom. What's the point? What's the point of that? So there's also this notion of when you make choices, understand that those have an impact. And what is the point of those things? And sometimes we make choices without even realizing that we're doing them. So spending some time to look at your art and really question it and engage with it. Like, what is my eye doing? What is the point of my drawing? What elements are important? All those are things that can help you. The birds are symmetrical, which feels unnatural. And what I mean by symmetrical, it's not really symmetrical. It's like birds in a pattern. You know, there's like the same distance almost between each one of these birds. And that seems a little bit unnatural. So notice also how, you know, different elements. So for example, if I had been making a fence, if the fence is symmetrical, it feels natural. But if you take birds and you make them kind of in a pattern, then it kind of breaks realism a little bit. Finally, I want us to take these and we're going to try to make them a little better. Okay? So we're going to take the exact same ones. This one, I guess what makes it really confusing is that I wanted to have a lot of trees, but I don't know what I'm looking at. It's a little confused, etc. So what if I decided from this ugly composition, well, I want to make, what if I take the qualities or the characteristics that I see in this composition and I decide to make a piece inspired by them? So what I mean is, you know, there's a lot of busyness. What if the point of my artwork is to make a busy, I was going to write busyness, but it looks like business. So I'm going to like busy, dark woods encroaching, maybe something about them encroaching. So how can I take that and push it a little bit more, but by trying to make the composition a little better? So if I'm thinking of encroaching, for example, you know, we had made these trees very kind of symmetrical, not symmetrical, very vertical, like, oh, there's like a vertical trunk and then just a big circle for the top. What if I made the trunks a little bit more interesting? So maybe some of them are a little bit angled. And what if instead of having something that's very mid, where there's kind of almost the same amount of the black, what if I make the trunk long and I add the leaves at the top, but instead of touching the top in a tangential way, which was kind of annoying, I make it very purposeful. It's going outside of the frame. What if I have another one that is diagonal, because I want to make like a busy dark woods. It's diagonal, but a little bit more straight. And maybe it's a different width, whereas these I kind of made them pretty much the same. And what if this one had some branches that were coming off here? And then I made them overlap so that, yes, there's a little bit of this interesting white space getting created. And then, you know, maybe I'll add in some of this grass, but I'll be purposeful with bringing it all the way to the bottom, or even, you know, making like kind of a base from which this grass grows so that there's none of that annoying white space. And I'll finish the grass later once I've placed the rest of the trees. But let me add some maybe vertical thin trees. What about if I put 2 of them kind of side by side? What if I have some of the branches kind of going down and there's like a variation in the thickness of my strokes? Maybe this one is a dead tree, because a forest doesn't only have live trees. You know, there are some plants that die. So what if this kind of shows these dead leaves, dead trees as well? And what if, you know, I made the grass go pretty high actually in this other one. So what if I build into that and I have the grass go a little higher, at least in some sections, but maybe not in all, maybe not in a symmetrical way. All right, let me add some more trees. What do you say? How about having one tree that is super knobbly and maybe has big roots? Then it might have, you know, some leaves as well. And then maybe these leaves have a little bit of a more interesting shape than just a circle. It's the cool thing with when you just work in black and white. You can just keep adding and modifying the shapes to make them a little bit more interesting, right? So there is a busyness to this, but maybe it's not busy enough. So what if I add some more of those straight trees in the back? Maybe some that are kind of more diagonal. Another one over here. So do you start to see how the fact that I was focusing on making an ugly drawing, and then I look at and find the characteristics of what's making the composition ugly, it can give me ideas for things to explore when I want to make it a little bit more purposeful and a little bit more intentional. And I think it comes back and kind of underlines the importance in your drawings of being intentional about what it is that your marks are doing. And to understand that when we're drawing, there's always going to be an intention whether we like it or not. So when you look at your art and you're like, something's off, try to look past the things that you decided and into the things that you might have decided without realizing it. Oh, I didn't go all the way to the edges. Oh, I have like these weird white spaces that don't really mean anything, or they're not serving the purpose. I hope that you've gotten a sense of that, and that you've enjoyed kind of exploring making these ugly compositions. I really do suggest that if you're scared about drawing a certain type of prompt or about a certain drawing that you want to do, allow yourself to make these tiny little thumbnails of things that are ugly. You can make them tiny if that makes it easier, and then blow them up a little bit more, and really allow yourself to play within that realm of ugliness. Observe and try to understand what's going on, and then push it into another realm that will allow you to create an image that is more like the image that you would like to create. I'd love to hear what you thought about that. So tell me in the comments what your drawings are about and how it felt, and if you got confused and a little lost like I did at first, and maybe what you learned. Thank you so much for joining in today's creative exercise. Thank you for trusting me to bring you on these weird journeys of mine into ugly art and how we can use it to really kind of flip things on their head, and to look at them in this slightly strange new way. I hope that you got something out of this, and of course, if you would love to join the class, it would be wonderful to see your projects where you actually work on trying to make more beautiful compositions in opposition to what we did today. But in the class, of course, we get into a lot more depth and detail around a lot of these principles and subjects that I've only very briefly and maybe not even mentioned all of them. So don't forget to click the link in the description if you want to join in. That would be wonderful. And other than that, I hope you hit like and subscribe and maybe the bell on YouTube so that I can give you more of these creative exercises and strange endeavors to making the kind of art that you want to be creating by making art that you didn't know that you wanted to create. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but I guess by making art that is just really weird and not what you're aiming for usually. Thanks so much for joining in. I hope you have a lovely day. And let me know in the comments how it went for you. I'm very, very curious.